Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning on green supply chains. Now, this is number 3 in a series of webinars podcasts that we've been running over the summer as part of a new series on sustainability-focused Think House events. Now, we previously had webinars on green recovery post-COVID-19 and the impact of environmental issues on international trade. And recordings of both of these webinars are available on our website, so do take a look at those when you get a chance. I'm Emma Bofton and I co-chair Think House Foundations, which is also part of the Think House programme. And Think House Foundations is aimed at in-house lawyers just starting out in their careers and up to 5 years PQE. So the topic for today is green supply chains and looking at how we can integrate environmental thinking into supply chains. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning by 2 of our experts in this field. We have Sarah Riding, a partner in our commercial IT and outsourcing team, whose background is in advising on supply chains, and she'll be walking us through the supply chain life cycle. I'm also joined by Ben Stansfield, a partner in our environment team, who will be feeding into that from an environmental regulation perspective. So the aim is for Sarah and Ben to speak for around about 30 minutes, and then we're going to leave time for questions at the end and draw this webinar to a close around about 11:45. Before I hand over to Sarah and Ben, a couple of housekeeping points. Firstly, if you would like to ask a question, then we're using the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. So just click on that and type in your question, and the question will then make its way to us. Sarah and Ben will do their best to deal with as many questions as they can in the time available, but I can't guarantee they're going to be able to get to everything this morning. Secondly, this webinar will be recorded and you'll be sent an email with the recording, so do feel free to share that amongst colleagues. And finally, at the end of the webinar, there'll be a link in your browser to complete a very short feedback questionnaire on the session. So please do take a couple of minutes, if you can, to fill in that feedback form. We really do use those to shape our future sessions. I'll now hand over to Sarah first, as she'll be kicking things off this morning.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you again all for joining us this morning. Really pleased to be talking to you about sustainability and the supply chain. So before COVID, there were 2 huge topics on company agendas, so Brexit and sustainability. We were working with many clients to ensure that their supply chain contracts were reflecting their green agendas. Sustainability across supply chains was no longer a public relations opportunity, but an integral part of supply chain strategies. A number of factors were also driving this. So the bottom line, the World Economic Forum published research that sustainable supply chain practices resulted in cost reductions of around 9 to 16%. Organisations also run the risk of being sidelined by competitors if they're not incorporating green practices within their supply chains. Early adopters were seen as gaining competitive advantage. Consumer choice. We recently saw the effect on Boohoo, the online fashion retailer, whose shares dropped overnight due to stories surrounding their poor supply chain management. So with COVID-19, organisations have obviously been having to take a much more reactive approach. Green initiatives inevitably took a firm step down the agenda, but supply chains have remained in focus. So at the start of the pandemic, we all obviously saw the supermarket shortages, and there's been much more attention on how resilient those supply chains were to meet the crisis. So emerging, or hopefully emerging from COVID-19, organisations are being much more proactive in addressing in what in many areas are now very fragile supply chains. The focus is on future-proofing, and I think the word around supply chains that we're hearing all the time at the moment is resilience, and making sure that they are resilient going forward. So what we're seeing is where some sustainability initiatives had been implemented, the supply chains were much stronger in the crisis as they were much more transparent. The renewed focus on supply chains therefore creates a window of opportunity which should not be missed on pushing sustainability back on the agenda. So highlighting the increased focus, we've seen several large organisations recently addressing this issue. So last week, Apple stated that its aim is to have a carbon neutral supply chain by 2030, focused on revamping its manufacturing and product life cycle. So these plans include more energy efficient data centres, recycling materials and carbon-free aluminium production. So the focus this morning is on each stage of the supply chain and the steps that can be taken to drive improved sustainability. Susie, can I have first slide, please? So the various stages of a supply chain offer plenty of opportunity to incorporate green practices. Organisations, however, really need to be looking holistically across their supply chains when looking at green initiatives. It's not only just within its own factories or premises, but it needs to be managed end to end across the supply chain. So strategies around sourcing, packaging and transport all have tangible effects on the environment. The strategies are adaptable across virtually any industry. There's always a better way to obtain materials, package goods or ship out to customers, for example. So organisations need to think about how these initiatives can be driven through its supplier base and what contractual provisions can be built into supply contracts to ensure that these initiatives are implemented. Whenever you're looking at putting contracts in place with suppliers, it should be a key objective to consider if you're making it the best it can be from a green perspective. So you'll see from the slide, we've split the supply chain into 4 stages. The first stage in this is the sourcing and use of materials. So we've seen a big increase in the push for organisations to source ethically with a focus on both human and environmental well-being. Ben shortly will be talking about, for example, the EU Green Deal and the implications that's having. We're also seeing a push for an increased use of sustainable materials that limit resource depletion and minimise carbon emissions. For example, increased use of bamboo, we're seeing that in much more products recently, and linen, which are both renewable and require less power to harvest and create. You may have seen that Greenpeace ran its Detox My Fashion campaign, which was supported by major brands such as Burberry and Nike. So many organisations are of course also struggling with the COVID crisis, and this is seeing an increase in some risky behaviour by some suppliers, and obviously things like site audits may have been cancelled, so some of that transparency with suppliers may have been lost recently. It's always important to remember that your supplier's risk is your risk, so you really need to be managing that within your contractual relationships. We see, for example, many organisations now implementing a code of conduct into supplier contracts, which sets out the key measures that suppliers should adopt. This is more important now to address, the risky behaviours I've just mentioned, where suppliers may be much more in survival mode. And this code of conduct can also be used to drive your strategy across your supplier base and include, for example, not only human rights violations, but also the need to obtain materials legally and safely, and to certify that certain materials and practices are not being done, or to drive other initiatives that you're trying to push out to your suppliers. We've seen this with McDonald's, so they're using their scale with their suppliers to try and reduce environmental impacts by 2030, and it's committing to a 31% reduction in emissions across its supply chain. So the second stage is manufacturing, so factories and productions themselves. So there's lots of key questions to address here when you are value mapping your supply chain. Are there more energy efficient measures which can be put in place? Waste reduction, how waste is disposed of, implementation of clean technology. Again, Apple, as part of its plans, has also stated that it has secured commitment from over 70 suppliers to use 100% renewable energy for production. And that's the equivalent of taking more than 3 million cars off the road. So it's really a need to think about what is being implemented in your own premises and within your own business, which may also need to be cascaded through your supply chain. Pre-COVID, we're also seeing quite a trend in contracts moving towards a just-in-time supply chain management. So that obviously involves placing materials in the right place at the right time and engaging suppliers as needed. This avoids overspend on materials and filling warehouses and helps streamline production. And technology has also helped this. So it's also meant that more data is available to forecast demands and stocking levels, So strategies really need to be thought through and consideration how you want your supply chain to operate and how that will work across all of your supplier base. So the third element on the supply chain is distribution, and there's a couple of key threads here. So packaging, we've all seen the huge drive for a reduction in packaging, and there are also key packaging changes on the horizon, which again Ben will talk about shortly. Initiatives that we've seen include, driving 100% recyclable or biodegradable, or actually avoiding packaging altogether. And again, this needs to be really passed down and making that measurable within your suppliers. We often see this managed, for example, by putting in place KPIs to achieve reduction in packaging by your suppliers. So you may want to think about, what initiatives you can focus on within your organisation, be that reduced packaging, more recyclable packaging, and if there are any measurable outcomes you can place on your suppliers. And then it's putting in place, very measurable outcomes in terms of KPIs and thinking about the remedies for each of those. Logistics is the other key area along the distribution route. So commercial freight is obviously a significant contributor to total transport emissions. We see obligations placed on logistics suppliers to match size of trailer with the load being carried, and efficient route optimisation to cut down on empty miles and reduce the environmental impact. Use of alternative fuels, and there's obviously the drive towards electric vehicles. So we're seeing, much more strategy around increase of electric vehicles and more monitoring of how the automotive sector is going down that route. There's also been a trend towards local supply or manufacture, so shortening those supply routes, more onshoring, and also procuring materials from fewer sources. So some organisations have been cutting down their normal level of supplier and just having a couple of key suppliers in place to again minimise those supply routes. As I mentioned, with the onset of technology, more data is available to monitor routes and place obligations on suppliers to commit to and demonstrate cost savings. And implementing these initiatives as obligations within supply contracts and having more transparency are really key to making supply chains resilient going forward. So finally, the last stage, so end of product life. How are companies handling products at the end? So encouraging recycling, reusing. We've seen the closed loop system, customers having incentive to return defective or recycled products to the manufacturer. And again, Ben will be looking at how recycling targets will be strengthened going forward. Isle of Bikes is a good example. So some of you may well have heard of Isle of Bikes, especially those of you with children. It's the very high-end bike manufacturer that mainly hits the children's market. They had a project which they call the Imagine project, which they started running a couple of years ago. And that's really rethinking the way in which bikes will be made and used in the future. For example, ownership, so renting instead of buying. And at the end of life, the raw materials can be separated and reused. So we're seeing much more of a trend towards closed loop or circular supply chain. And Apple, in its sustainability plans, said it was going to use a recycling robot called Dave, which disassembles the iPhone to recover key materials such as tungsten. And again, it's just a need to be thinking about, can obligations be placed on your suppliers to drive these cost efficiency by reusing materials? Are things like closed loop supply chain something that your business wants to go down, and how can that be focused on your supplier base? So that's really just a quick whiz through the supply chain in terms of trends we're seeing and initiatives that can be pushed through into your contractual relationships. And it's something you need to be thinking about into all of the contracts that you're entering into. But I'll now pass over to Ben, who will look at some of the key legislation which is also sitting behind these initiatives.
Thank you, Sarah. And interesting to know that Apple have called a machine Dave. My father-in-law is a Dave, and there is nothing that man can't fix, repair, or maintain. So it's a very suitable name. So following Sarah's presentation, I want to highlight a couple of specific legislative developments and trends in the UK, and highlight to you how you might need to think about those carefully in your supply chains, even if those rules haven't yet crystallized. So action needs to be taken now in advance of these rules coming. Clearly in 10 or 12 minutes, I'm not going to be able to get into many specific details, but I want to give you a flavour of what's out there. So I'm going to talk briefly a little bit about packaging, a little bit about reporting. I'm going to talk to you about the EU Green Day, put my teeth in, the EU Green Deal, and its focus particularly on the need for sustainable raw material use. And then I'm going to leave you Jerry Springer style with a few regulatory final thoughts. So packaging, there is a whole suite of packaging changes on the horizon. For environmental nerds like me, it's really quite exciting. Some of those are going to impact us fairly soon. So the plastic packaging tax, which I'll talk to you shortly about, and others are going to come in a few years' time. So the deposit return scheme for drinks containers. You might remember when you were a small child taking Corona bottles, very aptly named, back to the newsagents, getting your 10p and then spending on sherbet dipped out. That's going to come back. And extended producer responsibility schemes for packaging are going to be coming into. All businesses, although this is not sexy stuff, all businesses use packaging. You either receive goods in packaging or you sell goods in packaging. It's really important stuff. Packaging protects product in transit. It increases the marketability of goods. If you get the packaging right and make it look attractive and better than competitors. And in some cases, packaging can be really critical to the value of goods. So a collector's item or a special edition toy. Right, two interesting developments on their way. First of all, the plastic packaging tax. So we've known about this for a couple of years. It's sort of been mentioned in recent budget speeches by chancellors. So plastic packaging that is produced in or imported into the UK, and if that contains less than 30% recycled plastic, it's going to be subject to a new levy from April 2022. That's going to be about £200 a tonne, we think, and it's going to be self-assessed. So do not worry, there will not be a tax inspector sitting in your waste bins going through your rubbish. You're going to need your own internal robust audit procedure to go through that. I think we're expecting legislation or draft legislation a bit later this year as to how the mechanics of the tax are going to work, and we'll be looking very closely at the definitions of the materials and the exemptions for small businesses and so forth. So as ever, the detail is to follow. It's expected that new tax is going to affect about 20,000 businesses in the UK, so chances are a number of you on this webinar are going to have to get to grips with it. Packaging is clearly, it's a major issue for supply chains. So whether you're buying in the packaging or whether you're importing goods, you're going to have to get your heads around this. It isn't going to start, as I said, until April 2022, so you might want to consider doing a trial run next year, just to see how much of that packaging you're doing. Go and do some audits. Find out if you've got some non-recycled plastic packaging that you're going to have to be paying for. How much is that going to cost you? Data gathering, and this will be a theme of my little talk. Data gathering, robust auditing, really, really critical to your compliance. Right, UK packaging, producer responsibility scheme. So as I said, packaging, and Sarah said, packaging laws in the UK are in the process of being reformed. It's going to be a series of webinars in itself when it's finalised, and I don't want to get too nerdy on this session. Primary powers for the new scheme are going to be introduced in the Environment Bill. That was going through Parliament. We expect that to get royal assent sort of November, December time. It's a flagship piece of legislation, and it does a lot of things as well as packaging. So, and as ever with these things, the real detail is going to come in the secondary legislation and in the official guidance. So, of relevance for today, I think we're likely to see a single point of compliance rather than shared compliance across the chain. It's probably going to be the brand owner who takes the responsibility. So if your name's on the product, if your name's on the packaging, you're likely to be in the front line for that. Packaging is likely to go into an extended producer responsibility scheme. So you'll all be familiar with those when you buy new toasters, new hoovers. You go to Curry's or whatever other shop, and they say, well, we'll take your old waste electrical and electronic equipment and dispose of that carefully. That's one of those extended producer responsibility schemes, a take-back scheme whereby producers, manufacturers, importers are responsible for the cost of recycling. That's coming our way for recycling. Recycling targets, I think, are generally going to be strengthened, and so is labelling. We as consumers, there's misleading information out there. Is this recyclable? Is it not? So there's going to be better mandatory labelling. There's going to be education for the nation on this, lots of flyers, adverts. That's all going to be paid for by industry. So substantial change is coming for people who use or manufacture packaging. And your agreements have got to deal with that. Who's going to bear the cost? Who's going to bear the administration? Spoiler alert, neither of those are going to be a good thing to have. Reporting duties, I've probably spoken about this to some of you in the past, but there is a slew of reporting obligations out there. Currently, only certain businesses, whether it's a balance sheet, a turnover, or a number of employees, are subject to that reporting. Reports under Section 172 of the Companies Act. You've got to describe in those reports, how you're considering environmental and community impacts. Streamlined energy and carbon reporting, SECR, requiring businesses of certain criteria to talk about your energy, disclose your energy use. Greenhouse gas emissions, those have got to be reported on too for certain businesses. Voluntary reports, they're increasingly popular. Trailblazing businesses are putting information out voluntarily, talking about their impacts in far more detail than legislation requires. I think voluntary reporting is going to fast become the norm. I think a lot of businesses are enjoying that dialogue and that communication with their customers. I think it sets a high bar. I think investors and consumers, customers are really starting to expect that, and that's a good thing. Why is that important to supply chains? Well, you're going to need your suppliers to give you the data to write those reports. If you haven't got that raw material, that raw data as to the environmental performance of those products, how can you analyze it? How can you talk about your environmental impacts? So make sure your current agreements are giving you the information that you need to talk credibly about your footprint. Raw materials. So the EU Green Deal, this is the Commission's roadmap as to how it's going to decarbonise an entire continent. It's my crystal ball go-to, notwithstanding that we've left the EU, because the UK government isn't really talking about what it's going to do to get to net zero by 2050. So I'm looking overseas. The EU is saying that there's going to be a real focus on resource-intensive industries, so textiles, construction, electronics, plastics, and certainly textiles and construction are something that the UK government is talking about too. So we're probably going to see more producer responsibility schemes, not just for packaging, but for recycling, for reuse of textiles. Expect action on intentionally added microplastics. Unintentional releases of plastics too, so from whether that be from textiles when you're washing your man-made your nylon t-shirts or your sports gear in the washing machine, that sheds huge amounts of microplastics. And also releases from tires too when you're driving around, those are going to be scrutinized. Carbon leakage, that's a really big focus at the moment. Moving your manufacturing or carbon intensive industries outside of the EU is a really effective way of reducing the carbon footprint of the EU. But it's not really, because it's just pushing the problem overseas. So the EU are talking about carbon taxes applicable to imports, raw materials or products imported from countries which have poor carbon emissions legislation. So are your supply agreements going to make you pay for that tax? Or will your suppliers be paying for that tax? And again, how are your customers and consumers going to feel about you importing goods or having services provided in those jurisdictions? The world is moving very rapidly, and consumer power is extremely powerful. And again, why is the Green Deal relevant? Well, if you're using or you're producing any of those products, change is coming. If you're heavily reliant on textiles or plastics, change is on its way, and your agreements need potentially for you to allow some flex in there. Can you substitute products from your suppliers if legislation changes? What about if public opinion changes? You remember when David Attenborough's Blue Planet came on, and suddenly one image, horrific image of a turtle, meant that we using single-use straws, plastic straws, was horrendous. It took a few months for legislation to catch up. Is that event going to be something that you want to react to quicker than law? Right, Jerry Springer, final thoughts on trends. And I think these are things you need to think about when you're drafting all your contracts, not just your supply contracts. But flexibility, environmental rules are going to change. The days of regulatory certainty when it comes to sustainability, climate, environment, they're gone. Net zero is not a nice to have. It's not a target we should be trying to hit. Nearly hitting decarbonisation goal by 2050. It's just not good enough. If we don't hit net zero, we're in trouble. In fact, even if we do hit net zero, there's a risk that we go beyond that, that sort of much talked about 2-degree increase on average temperatures compared to pre-industrial levels. The world is changing. Net zero has to be hit. So if climate rules aren't working, they're going to be scrapped, they're going to be strengthened, they're going to be replaced, and it's going to happen really quickly. Goalposts are going to move, for sure. So let's take a look at that plastic packaging tax. Is that 30% recycling content going to change? Will it be 40 next year, or the year after, 50, 60? Who knows? Will the price per tonne increase? Will it go into other areas of packaging too? So it's not just plastic that's got to be recycled content. Will it be cardboard? So Sarah talked about transport and decarbonising the fleet. So government's currently got a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and light goods vehicles from 2040. We're consulting to bring it to 2035. The Committee on Climate Change, the hugely influential public body that said, should we have net zero by 2050 and got their way? They're saying actually 2032, if not sooner. So, right now we don't know if we can buy petrol cars in 12 years' time, 15 or 20. Regulatory certainty has gone out the window. The supply contracts that you're signing tomorrow morning, they've got to have flex in there to account for those changes, because some of those changes might be predictable, but some, who knows what's going to happen. Theme 2, scrutiny. So customers are really savvy, right? Climate, my teenage daughter, is all she talks about. She thinks that's cool for once, and she's wrong, but climate awareness and knowledge is at an all-time high. My point's really simple here. If you mess up your environmental performance, there's going to be instant and fairly unforgiving backlash. So before you sign up any contract, including your supply contracts, ask yourself, does this contract improve my environmental credentials? Does this product or raw material, does it help me take a step forward to decarbonisation? If not, is there an alternative option that I can use? Could we do better? Is there an alternative raw material? Could there be something better in a year's time, 2 years' time? Do I really want to be signing up 5 years when actually there's something much better around the corner in a couple of years' time? Is there a non-plastic option? Is there one with fewer hazardous substances? Can we get these goods shipped to our factory or transported to our factory using less CO2? Can we change the tyres on the trucks to cause less air pollution? Is there an option with more recycled content? What impact does this product have, or this raw material have, for biodiversity? We talk about net zero, we talk about decarbonisation, but sustainability goes beyond that. We need to manage and we need to protect our environment. We need to improve biodiversity. We need to protect forests. We need to manage our ecosystems better. So it's not just emissions that count. I think, ask yourself, what are the optics of this? What does this look like in front of my customers? What do I need to do to convince them that actually this is the green, the sustainable choice? Having plastic water bottles in your meeting rooms, it staggers me how many times back in the day, when I went to meeting rooms, I saw that. It's not a good look. Coffee pods in client receptions, again, not a good look from a recycling and sustainability perspective. We use vegware for some of our events, so environmentally friendly, but it looks like single-use plastics. And the number of times I've had to talk to people at events saying, no, I promise you, it's not plastic. So the optics, what do people think? That's important. Finally, what can my supplier do to improve their environmental performance? What help can I give them? It's collaborative, right? What can they do better? Could they air cool their machinery rather than using water and resources? Could they use less fertilizer, fewer pesticides? Could they buy renewable energy, change their light bulbs, all the low-hanging fruit type stuff? So, work with suppliers to get them to improve. My final point is data capture. So increased scrutiny, more reporting. There's a huge amount of green data you need to capture, and that's critical. The long-term supply contracts you're entering into now, they've got to get that fast, reliable flow. It isn't good enough as an organisation to say we don't know when someone asks you about your environmental impact, your energy efficiency, or the sustainability of the raw materials you're using. You've got to have that information. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah to talk us through some of her practical tips for supply chains.
Thank you, Ben. That's really great, and I hope that's been helpful to everyone, just in terms of looking at what's on the horizon and what's coming up, against the backdrop of the cycle that I've talked about and the things that you can be looking at with your suppliers along the way. So there's obviously some things there that you need to start thinking about now in terms of legislation that will be coming in, to make sure that you can adapt to that quite quickly and make sure your suppliers are on board with that. So just to finish off, I just wanted to go through some very practical steps with you that you can kind of take away and think about with your own organisations. And I've just put a few up there on the slide. So I think the one thing that's key is making sure that any sustainability strategy that you have must be end-to-end across the supply chain. So it's not just confined to your own site, yourself as an organisation. And if we looked at, you know, what Apple are doing, they've looked holistically across their whole supplier base to drive through their improvement. So I think it's really key to be kind of looking at the end-to-end solution. Also the value chain map. So when you're creating these, you should be analysing the supply chain for opportunities for improvements that can be made at all steps of it. And I think it's really focusing on the core strategies that you're adopting as an organisation to take forward. So it's not just having, you know, that overarching commitment to sustainability. It's thinking what those core strategies are. So is that, you know, a move towards closed loop manufacture? Is it reduction of fuel emissions, ethical sourcing, for example? And then it's really making sure that you're cascading those as measurable obligations throughout your supply chain. And so it's kind of building in obligations on your suppliers to make sure that you can meet your end goals and they are working with you towards that. And ways we've seen that, as I've mentioned, is suppliers code of practice. So that's become absolutely key now in most supply contracts that we're looking at. So it's a really thorough document, which again is very measurable and is incorporating, you know, the best practices and the things that you want your organisation and your suppliers to adopt into your contracts. And I think it's also thinking about, you know, what are the remedies for failure for that? Could that be a material breach? Could it lead to termination, etc.? So it's making sure that there's measurable objectives and there is some remedy there. The use of technology. So this is obviously really key now going forward in the digital age. There's a lot more data out there, and there's a need to do the monitoring and reporting. So really making sure that your supply chain is transparent, that you understand what's going on there, that you're being proactive and not reactive with it, so that you're aware of any issues from the outset. And obviously tied into that, you know, the audit rights, so, you know, the scrutiny sitting behind that. I mentioned KPIs earlier, so again, making sure that we've got measurable objectives within contracts. We don't just want, you know, the phrase that suppliers are going to meet sustainability targets without anything sitting behind that. So KPIs are always useful, linking them to specific objectives, and making sure again that, you know, that's drilling down the efficiencies you're seeking to achieve, and making sure that there is some remedy there if they're failing to perform them. And I suppose the key to all this really is engagement with suppliers. So as I said before, where we've seen supply chains work really well throughout the COVID situation is where there's been transparency across them, where organisations are really on top of their supplier base, the sustainability issues and all the other issues. And it's just having that engagement, which is really making those supply chains work well and drive your business objectives through. So hopefully that's given you some practical steps to think about when you're looking at your supply chains. And I think there's a couple of messages just to leave with you. So it's remembering that any of your suppliers' practices and their risky practices are in turn going to be your own risky practices. So it's making sure you're looking at your contracts and making provision for those and how they will be dealt with. And I think the key message from both Ben and myself is really about thinking about supply chain strategies in every contract you do, and having the green agenda high up on the objectives for them, and really thinking about, if you're making the contract the best it can be to drive sustainability initiatives, or if there's other things that you can use that opportunity at contract negotiation to build in. So I think that's all from me and Ben, but very welcome to take any questions that you may have.
Super, thanks very much, Sarah and Ben. I think we've got some good questions coming throughout both of your talks. The first of which, Sarah, if we direct that one at you, it's related to supply chains. A valid point on kind of in a COVID world with financial pressure kind of across supply chains, the last thing businesses want is to increase costs. And whether or not, I mean, there's a concern that driving green agendas is going to increase those costs. I just wondered if you had any thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's always a challenge to balance spend against, you know, business objectives and what's the best place to put that spend going forward. I think right at the start of my talk, I mentioned some statistics which have come out from the World Economic Forum. So that was really showing that sustainability within the supply chain can have a real positive impact on the bottom line. And it's things like having more transparency, so it's building more resilience, it's benefiting the chain, there's more efficiency there. And we've also seen research which is saying that it's really helping build competitive advantage. And then I think it's the day-to-day issue. So if you are reducing costs, then having less packaging will have less packaging cost. If you're having shorter transport routes, there will obviously be less cost for the business. And then I suppose the big one is investment in technology. So obviously that big cost at the outset, but the benefit from that in terms of being able to kind of forecast demand, forecast warehousing needs, forecast, you know, stock and what suppliers need to be doing. So that's ultimately driving savings across your organisation.
Thanks, Sarah. One here for you, Ben, if that's okay. It's about whether or not new laws or proposals, do you think they're going to have a positive impact? So the example given is plastic tax. Do you think that this is just another moneymaker for the Treasury, or actually is it meant to nudge businesses into adopting better behaviours?
Okay, so the tax, I don't think it's going to be a significant source of revenue. I think the Treasury are estimating something like 250 million in year one, so enough for Boris to build a small hospital somewhere. But that's going to go down to, I don't know, I think they've estimated 210, 215, something around that area after 2 or 3 years. So it doesn't sound like it's going to be a big source of income. And I think it's probably fair to say that Treasury have not put its most senior and experienced team on this, based on some of the conference calls and materials we've seen. But you know, I think it's going to work. I think, you know, for a number of our clients, I suspect they will be doing the right thing, as it were, anyway. I think consumer power will drive change as effectively as the plastic tax, but you know, without doubt, it will kill the market for any plastic packaging that doesn't have recycled content. So I think it will have a positive effect. I think there will be, you know, a lot of this legislation is just a few percent improvement here and there, and it's all going to add up. I don't think there's going to be any one monumental piece of regulation that's going to suddenly make us clean up our act and become eco warriors. I think there'll just be a lot of nudge things along the way.
Thanks, Ben. I was interested also in your comments about environmental reporting and particularly about voluntary reports. What do you think, from a risk perspective, that's going to now bring for businesses?
So I guess, well, the risks are saying one of the big risks is saying too much. And I've seen draft reports which clients have sent me, which have been written by, you know, junior members of the environment team, and they're talking about minor breaches of permits at every single site, disclosing way more than anybody really wants to read. And so, you know, again, to the in-house counsel, you know, if you take nothing else away from what I've said, please make sure that you are personally involved with vetting those reports, because they're going to be read. So saying too much is a risk. I think saying too little or not doing it is as big a risk. I think, you know, silence, you know, it says so much when you don't say anything. Again, we're all lawyers on here, so it's yeah. So I think getting the balance right is pretty tricky. I think investors and NGOs are going to be reading those reports. Investors, BlackRock, issued a report where they commented on the investee company's environmental performance, so they're almost naming and shaming as a regulator might. NGOs are looking at those reports very carefully. They may be bringing fiduciary, breach of fiduciary claims in future as well. So there's a risk there too.
Thanks, Ben. Interesting question that's come up about the impact or the positive environmental impact of businesses working from home with the reduced flights, travel, etc. And whether or not the panel think that that's going to continue, and whether or not that's going to then have a bigger impact on us looking at more human behavioural ways of changing how we do things. Ben, that's probably best for you to start with, or you know.
Yeah, so I'll kick off on that. I think that's a really interesting one, isn't it? So in terms of, you know, I think we've always all noticed it. We've all heard the news stories about the environmental impact of, you know, home working and, you know, the effect on, you know, transport, etc., etc. And I think it's one that organisations really need to be looking at when they're building up their strategies on this. So it's whether that will be something that will be adopted going forward. I think it's, you know, obviously case by case on, you know, an organisation as to whether that's something on their agenda or not. But obviously we're going to see the ripples of that for some time, I think.
Yeah, I entirely agree. And I, you know, Gowling's, you know, I do think we've been a bit of a pathfinder as a law firm in having a very loud environmental voice and a policy, Planet Plus, on our website, and we've been very effective on that. And we've actually, during lockdown, been working on our phase 2 of that. You know, for us, a lot of our impacts are flying to the States. You know, we're an Anglo-Canadian law firm, and we do a lot of business in the States. And many of us would travel over to the US 2 or 3 times a year. So that's a big impact. But we're now doing virtual trips. So, you know, our Texas sales team were getting up or staying up very late at night and did a virtual trip to Texas a few months ago, and it's really successful. And so you can still do business virtually. I guess when you're doing your reporting, you'll need to think about the energy use that people are having at home, and I think you'll need to make assumptions when you're writing up that and saying, well, you know, we have however many lawyers or however many members of staff all using laptops and printers, and you have to make some assumptions around that. But as long as those are transparent and they're credible and people can see that you're taking those things into account, again, I think you can disclose your environmental impacts as a business really thoroughly.
Thanks both. It's now just coming up to 11:45, and I said we'd finish after 45 minutes, so I'm going to draw it to a close there now. So thank you very much to Sarah and Ben, both for the session and for fielding those questions. Do keep an eye out for our next webinar, which will be taking place on the 24th of September, and it's on the emergence of climate change litigation and the risks for businesses across all sectors. If you're on our mailing list, you will receive further details of this. Before I close, if you do have time to fill in that feedback questionnaire, please can you do that? And all that leaves for me to say is thank you to you all for watching and listening today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.